Welcome to the Critical Christian Podcast. We're your hosts, Dan
and Justin, and we read the Bible together, ask critical questions, and provide questionable answers.
Whether you like it or not.
That's right. Dan, can you recap where we left off from last week?
I sure can. Last time we were reading the Bible, and biblical things were happening all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for instance, there was Abraham.
Yeah. And
his sons, maybe? I have no idea. Okay.
I think last week we had the visitor of the three angels to Abraham and Sarah to announce that they'd be having a child.
Oh, yeah, and then she laughed or something.
Yeah.
And then Abraham made fun of her.
I mean, he called her out pretty hard directly in front of God.
Or it might have been God, right?
Right.
We weren't sure who it was.
It just says he.
Somebody was calling her out.
Right. So anyways, last week we left off and Abraham was still with the three visitors. And Sarah was, I assume, inside of her tent sulking.
Probably.
So then we'll be picking it up in Genesis 18, verses 16 through 33. And this is where the angels begin to tell Abraham about the destruction that will befall Sodom and Gomorrah. Something of that nature. Dan, can you read 16 through 21?
Sure. Then the men rose from there and looked towards Sodom, and Abraham went with them to send them on the way. And the Lord said, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I am doing? Since Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. For I have known him, in order that he may command his children and his household after him, that they keep the way of the Lord, to do righteousness and justice, that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has spoken to him." And the Lord said, "Because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grave, I will go down now and see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry against it that has come to me, and if not, I will know."
Then the men turned away from there and went toward Sodom. But Abraham still stood before the Lord. And Abraham came near and said, "Would you also destroy the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Would you also destroy the place and not spare it for the 50 righteous that were in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing as this, to slay the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous should be as the wicked. Far be it from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do right?" So the Lord said, "If I find in Sodom 50 righteous within the city, then I will spare all the place for their sakes." Then Abraham answered and said, "Indeed, now, I who am but dust and ashes, have taken it upon myself to speak to the Lord. Suppose there were 5 less than the 50 righteous. Would you destroy all of the city for the lack of 5? So he said, "If I find there 45, I will not destroy it." Then he spoke to him yet again and said, "Suppose there should be 40 found there." He said, "I will not do it for the sake of 40. Then he said, "Let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak. Suppose 30 will be found there." So he said, "I will not do it if I find 30 there." And he said, "Indeed, now I have taken it upon myself to speak to the Lord. Suppose 20 should be found there." So he said, "I will not destroy it for the sake of the 20. Then he said, "Let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak but once more. Suppose then 10 should be found there." And he said, "I will not destroy it for the sake of the 10. So the Lord went his way as soon as he had finished speaking with Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place. Whole lot going on there, huh?
Sure is. I mean, not really, but I mean, they're just saying, hey, how many people will you kill?
I think we're going to find more to talk about here than maybe anticipated.
We always do.
Dan, the first question was on 18, 17, and 20. It says, "Then the Lord said, 'Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do?' Then the Lord said, 'The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great and their sin so grievous, that I will go down and see if what they have done is as bad as the outcry that has reached me. If not, I will know. What were your thoughts on that?
I presume this is a remnant of when God wasn't all-knowing. I will go down says to me that the writer is assuming God is chilling in the clouds, not fully aware of what the humans are doing. I don't know. It's odd to see him talking to the angels, trying to get their counsel.
Yeah, I get that. And I do think that this is in keeping with some of the older parts of Genesis, where God is appearing to be somewhat limited, very comparable to the Mesopotamian counterparts, where they're not all-knowing, all-seeing, and they need to be taken care of by the people. It's interesting that here God refers to the cry of them rising up to him. Theoretically, the outcry is so great that he's able to hear it from the heavens, which comes up a few times in the book of Genesis and also in Exodus. But it reminded me of the flood in the Enuma Elish story, where one of the reasons for the flood was because the noise of the human beings which they created to do their work for them on the earth was so loud that they could no longer sleep or lie down in peace. A section from the Enuma Elish says, and this is being spoken by one of the deities, is, "By day I cannot rest, by night I cannot lie down in peace. But I will destroy their way, I will. Let there be lamentation, and let us lie down again in peace." So there's kind of this older theme here that the noise created by the human beings is able to reach up into the heavens. And certainly when I read this part of Genesis about the outcry of the city rising up, my mind is picturing this old school conception of what you said.
Right.
The deities up in the heavens. Right? And then we see something similar to this in the Tower of Babel, where God has to physically come down and inspect the city and the tower.
Yeah.
Right? As if an all-knowing, all-seeing God didn't already know what was happening. Right? And it says, "But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, Indeed, the people are one, and they all have one language. And this is what they begin to do. Now, nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them." So what we see here is, of course, the gods, or at least God and his council.
Or at least the human part.
Right.
Where, they think they can interact with God or reach him,
Right.
So, it's really both ways there.
Right.
It's just a different way to look at God, I guess, which makes me, wonder, I don't know, what they view the actual God is. You know what I'm saying?
It's interesting, too. Remember when we did Genesis 3?
Of course I do.
When God is walking in the garden and he's like, "Adam, where are you?"
Right.
Did he not know where Adam was?
Right.
And if he did know where Adam was, would he not just appear in Adam's presence?
Right.
Did he have to walk the garden and find him?
It's clear that there are two different views of God that they're trying to, mesh together.
Right. And then even when Adam and Eve need to be removed from the garden so that they are no longer immortal, would not an all-powerful God just click his fingers and evaporate the garden or erect some sort of mystical barrier? But instead he went with a flaming sword.
Right.
I feel like an all-powerful God that spoke the universe into existence could theoretically just make the garden and the tree disappear altogether, solving the problem.
Try it all over again.
Right. Although, in a tangent I didn't prepare for, but since we're on it,
yeah,
the location of the garden could have been destroyed in the flood.
I thought it was supposed to be in the Fertile Crescent or something.
Yeah, the location of Eden, I think personally, my best guess was in part of the Gulf down there not too far from Ur.
Well, I mean, we know the rivers that it connects to, right?
Well, the rivers that connect, that are most likely the rivers that they're speaking about, are currently underwater in the Gulf.
Huh? Is that true?
Yeah. Let me get Google Maps open.
Huh.
And then we'll take a look here real quick. All right, now that we've got a crude map overlay, the area of the Gulf right next to where modern-day Kuwait is, if you follow the rivers into the Persian Gulf, it turns out that there's actually inhabitable land, or what used to be inhabitable land, underneath the Gulf. So according to the biblical text, if you look at where the rivers connect and the geography, it looks to me like the Persian Gulf is actually over top of where Eden would have been.
Let me ask you a question. All right. So, is there proof that there was a land people could live on, like underwater?
Most likely biblical location is currently underwater is what I'm saying.
Right.
Yeah, where they thought it would have been.
Right.
Okay.
But that means at one point it was, of course, not underwater. Right?
Yeah, that's what I'm suggesting.
So here's my question. How long would it take for the world to get, from where you have dry land where somebody can live to where it's underwater if you're not talking about the flood? Isn't that something that takes like millions of years or something? You know what I mean?
Right. So great question. And I think a lot of people believe the Persian Gulf, the water levels rose rather rapidly due to a flood event or due to glacier melt.
So you think the glaciers could be the flood event?
Well, if we assume that there was once dry land in the Persian Gulf and it was swallowed up by ocean water, if we assume that happened because of glacier melt, it could have happened pretty rapidly. Of course, it could have happened much faster due to some sort of a flood event, but I'm not sure what type of a flood event would have caused it.
All right. I'm just, wondering if this is proof maybe of the flood, because you're telling me that there was proof that there was inhabitable land or a city or what have you underwater now,
Well, yeah, just like the Black Sea, where there, archaeology has discovered that there are, in fact, settlements around the edge of the Black Sea where there is currently water. There once was civilization.
So how long would that have taken for that to be swallowed up?
Well, the prevailing theory is that the Black Sea flood was a cataclysmic type of flood where it happened all at once.
Even people who aren't Christians think that?
Yeah.
That's crazy right there.
That's a real thing.
Isn't that proof of the flood? Or if not proof, at least...
It's the proof of a flood.
Right, a flood.
A regional flood.
Yeah, I get it. But still, pretty good flood.
I know. And, the Persian Gulf, if it flooded, would have been certainly another regional flood. If it happened that the Persian Gulf region and the Black Sea region, if we assume that they had flooded at a similar time period... one could see how there would be widespread storytelling about a massive global flood.
I don't suppose there's a way to find that out, right?
I mean, not in the time period that we have today while we're talking about Abraham and the 3 visitors.
Okay.
I think, let's get back to that before we spend a whole episode on the flood again.
We definitely could. All right.
Another example of God's limited nature in the Old Testament, I think, comes from Exodus, and this is a very similar parallel to what we see in the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, where God again hears the outcry. It says the Israelites groaned in their slavery and cried out, and their cry for help because of their slavery went up to God. God heard their groaning, and he remembered his covenant with Abraham and Isaac and with Jacob. So God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them. Then it says further in Exodus 3:7-8, I have surely seen the oppression of my people who are in Egypt. I have heard their cry because of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows. So I have come down to deliver them out of the hands of the Egyptians. So here, the omnipresence of God seems to not be there because he has to come down from heaven to earth. And he only remembers his people because their outcry from being slaves were so incredibly loud.
Well, I guess that's what you were saying earlier, right?
Right.
About how that's why the gods wanted to kill everybody, because they were so loud.
Right.
So I guess that parallels it, right?
It definitely parallels, the ancient Near Eastern idea.
Mm-hmm.
The physical relationship between the heavens and the earth. Let's talk about the three men and what they talked to Adam. I'm sorry, what they talked to Abraham about.
All right.
In 1822, it says, "Then the men turned away from there and went toward Sodom, but Abraham stood before the Lord." And you had some thoughts on that.
Yeah. I was just wondering if these are like the angels of death. And I'm guessing Abraham is pretty glad he fed them now. You don't want an angel of death upset with you, let alone three of them.
Right. Yeah, I mean, when the Grim Reaper comes for you, you want to negotiate your way out of that, and keeping them fed is probably a good way to do that, right?
Worse than an angel of death is an angry one.
Right. Yeah. An angry angel of death.
Right.
So, in trying to identify the three angels, I think we've got a couple different scenarios we can run with. One is that they were all three angels. One theory is that they're all three men, divine beings manifesting as men, as to not scare the human beings. But there's another option, which is that two of them were angels and that one of them was the Lord himself manifested in human form. And when I first heard this theory, I thought to myself, well, maybe not. We'll see what happens. But think about the number of times in the passage we just read last week where Abraham refers to the angels either singularly or plural as Yahweh, and the number of times where the narrator himself says, "The Lord said to Abraham," when referring to one or multiple of the beings, right? So verses 19:1 refers to them as angels. Other passages refer to them as men. 18:22 seems to indicate that, and this is the passage we're reading here, that Yahweh and the two angels might be different, meaning one of them is Yahweh and two of the angels are just angels. And I'll explain this now. It says, "The men turned away from there and went towards Sodom, but Abraham stood before the Lord." Possibly referring here that one of the angels is literally Yahweh, the Lord, and the other two are just angels. And then he actually has the conversation with the Lord from there about, well, would you really, destroy the righteous with the wicked? And throughout this conversation, it said, the Lord said this, Yahweh said, and then, Abram. So I think it's very possible that...
So is God with two angels of death?
God with two angels
of death.
And then, interestingly enough, who goes to the city of Sodom to check them out? Not Yahweh.
I don't know, an angel?
Well, the two angels, remember?
Oh, yeah, that's the two angels.
We're about to read that here coming up real shortly, but the two angels carry on. They already left, and Abraham stays behind to converse with the Lord. And then when they're done, the Lord returns to wherever he came from. It never says that he went to visit the city. And then the two angels do carry on to visit the city, which leads me to believe one of two things is true. Either God didn't want to go visit Sodom, or else he might have destroyed it on the spot. Maybe because of the sin. I don't know. Or maybe God was really only there to meet with Abraham. He never intended to visit Sodom. That's what his angels of death were for.
That sounds the most likely, right?
Right.
I mean, I hate the idea of thinking that if God got too close, he would just be like, they're sinning too much,
Right. Well, that's been the implication. So a lot of people believe that, and you've heard it, where people say, well, God can't be in the presence of sin.
Right.
But, I mean, that's not really in the Bible.
It doesn't make any sense.
Right. Well, there's a verse, in Habakkuk 1:13.
Habakkuk? Is that in the Bible?
Habakkuk is definitely in the Bible.
One of the 66 ones?
It's one of the books.
Okay.
Oh boy. Sorry. I was going to read a passage here. In Habakkuk,
I've never heard of that before in my life.
You've never heard, well, you might have heard people refer to it as Habakkuk, which is what people say when they want to sound fancy, but it's not necessarily the right way to pronounce it.
Okay.
It says here, your eyes are too pure to look on evil. You cannot tolerate wrongdoing. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
That seemed to indicate that possibly God couldn't have gone to
I mean, that's clearly just poetic, right?
Possibly.
I mean,
possibly. It does say in Exodus 33:20 that nobody can look on the face of God and live.
Yeah, but that's a little different, isn't it?
Right. So I think that might be poetic as well.
Right there, yeah. That right there is a video right to itself.
Right, whether or not someone can see the face of God and live. I think you're right there.
Because I got a lot to say about that one, but I'm not gonna.
Well, back at the issue of whether or not, if there's a reason why God didn't visit Sodom but the angels did. A lot of people have stated it's because God couldn't tolerate the sin. I actually disagree with that. For a couple reasons. One, because remember in Job when the sons of God came to the Lord and Satan was among them, and then he issued a challenge to God. And then we see also in Zechariah 3, it says, then he showed me Joshua the high priest standing before the angel of the Lord, and Satan standing at his right side to accuse him. The Lord said to Satan, the Lord rebuke you, Satan. The Lord who has chosen Jerusalem rebuke you. Is not this man a burning stick snatched from the fire? So on and so forth. But the point here is that before Yahweh stands both the angel of the Lord and Satan himself.
Mm-hmm.
Are we to assume that sinful men can't stand in God's presence, but sinful angels can? And if so,
right.
Why would there be a difference? Why would the sin of the angels be less than the sin of men?
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure out the difference between angels and people, but anyhow.
Right. Or is it that because men are mortal, being sinful in the presence of God causes their mortal self to die, whereas since angels are non-mortal, they can be in the presence of God even though they can necessarily be sinful.
I mean, to go off on a tangent, I think it's all semantics.
All right, Dan, on 1823, you had some questions. Can you read 1823 for us and then some of your thoughts?
Then Abraham approached him and said, will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? So after all the miracles and all that, Abraham is still like, hey, you sure these people deserve to be killed? I like that he acknowledges that God has the power to annihilate an entire city, but still has the audacity to question his motives.
Yeah. So what I find intriguing is in 22, which we just read, So the men turned away from there and went toward Sodom, but Abraham stood before the Lord. And then the very next thing that happens, Abraham approaches Yahweh and says, will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? And as far as I'm aware, God never said he was going to do any of that yet. When did he say he was going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah?
Is that true?
Yeah.
Surely something.
No, look at the text. All right, so if we go back to the very beginning, in 16, it says, the men rose from there and looked toward Sodom, and Abraham went with them to send them on the way. And the Lord said, shall I hide from Abram what I am doing? This is internal dialogue. Shall I hide from Abraham what I am doing?
Or maybe he was talking to the angels.
Perhaps. Since Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. For I have known in him, in order that he may command his children and his household after him, that they keep the way of the Lord.
Yeah, but it says, because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grave, I will go down now and see whether they have done all to blah, 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 blah.
Right.
You know? If not, I will know.
All he's saying is, I'm going to go down there and see if their outcry it matches in reality what I have heard coming up to me.
I guess.
He never says he's going to wipe them out. He never says he's going to destroy them or put judgment on them.
All right. Well, you got me. You got me on that one.
Isn't that an interesting...
Yeah, it's one of those things where you assume they must have mentioned it, you know?
Right. The human brain is really funny the way it's able to insert events that didn't happen in order to make the story more coherent.
Yeah, like, for instance, my wife showed me a picture of me and her sitting on a tree branch.
Mm-hmm.
Very nice, you know, and I said, oh, that's so pretty. And she's like, that never happened. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure it did. And she's like, no, you were never on a tree branch with me. And I'm like, all right, well, I would have believed it if you hadn't told me. You know, you just manufacture things.
The brain's good at that.
Mm-hmm.
Brain's really good at that. So anyways, back at 23.
I guess I also question why God was so genocidically happy, assuming that's a word, back then, but now can't seem to interfere in any evil. I don't know. It's interesting that Abraham first began with the number 50. It makes you wonder how many were living in Sodom at the time. I guess some people are irredeemable.
Yeah. I think early on in the scriptures, there seems to be a lot of genocide. And it's hard for me to wrap my mind around it because there, even after like the first 5 books of the Bible, you still see a lot of God commanding people to kill other people. But that seems to be completely absent from the last 3,000 years of history, 2.5. It's kind of like, well, where did he go?
Right.
Is he no longer interested in justice?
I don't know. I heard someone say that it seemed like it was 2 different gods, you know?
Oh, that was a very popular idea at certain points. Some of the earliest church fathers debated that pretty intensely on whether or not the God of the Old Testament and the New Testament were the same God. Right.
I mean, it could be the Old Testament was the God the Father, and the new one was, the Son. I don't know how that works, but I mean, maybe they have different personalities or something.
Rather than a trinity, it was a quadrity.
No.
Oh.
What? A quadrity?
4 in 1?
4 in 1. No, just Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Oh, there's Son, Holy Spirit, Old Testament Father, New Testament Father. It's like your dad and your stepdad. Where like the New Testament dad is like your cool stepdad, and like the Old Testament dad is your real dad, who doesn't have to be your friend because he's your dad. So he has to punish you and make you do the things you're supposed to do. But your stepdad wants to win your approval and be really cool. So he's like, hey, it's cool if you stay out till midnight. That's all right. Just don't look at girls.
Well, it is true. I mean, Jesus was trying to get everybody's approval. I mean, he was trying to start a religion there,
if I that's an interesting statement. It seems like it may be a mixture of both, right? He spent a lot of time healing people and then a lot of time just straight up condemning religious people.
Well, yes.
Right.
Yeah. He's complicated.
He really is. On the perceived plea, lack of righteousness by God and Abraham's pleading for God to invoke his sense of righteousness.
Yeah.
When I read it, for some reason I was reminded of the prayer of Mursili, and he was a leader in the 1300s in in the land of Hatti, where the Hittites are. And there was a bad plague that broke out there. According to archaeology, it's believed that it was probably one of the bubonic types of plagues. But nevertheless, there was a bad plague that broke out. And he dealt with it the way most ancient kings would, by imploring the help of the deities and trying to figure out who did what great sin to bring this upon the people. And in his prayer, he says this: whoever is a cause of rage and anger to the gods, and whoever is not respectful to the gods, let not the good ones perish with the evil ones. Whether it is a single town, a single house, or a single person, O God, destroy that one only. Look upon Hatti with pity and give the evil plague to other lands. Well, I think the voice of Abraham and the prayer of Mursili echo kind of a human instinct.
Was that in the Bible?
No, it's just an ancient tablet.
Great. Okay, go ahead.
From the land of the Hittites. But my thought is, Abraham. I feel like Abraham's plea is the same thing anybody would do if they found out that a city was about to be annihilated. Like, does it really? It's hard to believe they're all wicked. Does it really need to be annihilated?
Right. Yeah.
Are you sure about that, God? And
they're not even all wicked. I mean, Lot lives there, right?
Well, that's the thing. Lot lived there.
Yeah,
right?
It's his daughters who were wicked, but anyhow.
Right. Now, what's interesting here is there's two options, right? Because Abraham talks to him and says, if I find so many number of righteous people, will you spare the city? And God says, yes, I'll spare the city.
Uh-huh.
But here's the thing. There's a third option that, I don't know, just for some reason, just no one thought of. And that is you could just kill the wicked people and leave the non-wicked people.
Uh-huh.
That never occurred to anybody, that God could snap his fingers and just kill the bad ones?
I mean, I think the idea was that there were no good ones, right?
Yeah, and maybe the only good ones were Lot and his two daughters. I think that's what the story implies.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is, I mean, honestly, I'd say it was hard to believe, but I don't really know the population, Right. I mean, I guess you think of it out like, 10,000, 50,000, but it could have been like 500,
What if there were 10,000 people living there and they were all wicked, but Lot was able to find 50 good people, so the entire city was spared because 50 good people were found, even though thousands of them were terrible, wicked, evil human beings?
I mean, are you saying the alternative would be to kill them as well, or?
Well, I guess my question is, what's worse, killing a couple innocent people or allowing thousands of evil, wicked ones to live?
It's always worse to kill an innocent person.
I would go with that too, actually. I'm in agreement with you here. Yeah. Last note on the negotiation that I wrote.
I mean, it's always easy, to say, oh no, the end justifies the means. Until it's you on the chopping block, right?
Right. Yeah. It's like everybody wants to condemn gay kids until it's one of their kids.
Right.
And then all of a sudden they're very understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Or, get an abortion.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we see the same thing with abortion. Everyone's against abortion until you accidentally knock up somebody that you had no intention of getting pregnant, right?
Right. Yeah.
Anyways.
Getting back on topic.
Right. Not a super important note here, but I found that Abraham's negotiating skills were pretty darn good here, right? I mean, from a rhetorical standpoint, Abraham did a really good job about taking something and saying, listen, if I find this large number of people that are righteous, surely you wouldn't, a righteous judge wouldn't just wipe them out. But then he had the foresight to start whittling it down to the smallest number possible, right? Mm-hmm. I thought that was creative. I don't know, in the heat of the moment, if a lot of people would have been able to think clearly.
Yeah, especially if you're facing against an all-powerful God who can annihilate entire cities, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean,
I guess he's calm under pressure,
He did pretty well there, huh?
Yeah.